on whether we'll be on time.
Welcome to the Establish the Run free Monday night show. I am Mike Leone here with Drew Dinkmeyer. We're going to delve deep into tonight's showdown slate between the Los Angeles Chargers and New Orleans Saints. But before we get into that, we can recap yesterday's action, Drew. I had one team do pretty well in the luxury box, finished fifth place, winning $40K. Did tilt a little bit of Darius Slayton chalk, surpassing me at the end and needing a couple more Zeke yards. But Deshaun Watson triple stack got it done. We talked about that game a lot on our Saturday show, Established the Million. Any takeaways for you from yesterday, Drew?
Man, losing Dak, just injuries suck, was kind of my big takeaway. Losing Dak really takes the sails out of some fun stacking for the season. That Dallas offense was one that was GPP winners the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. So that was really it for me. I had nothing that kind of ran into anything. I had a rule on DraftKings for my sets that I required minimum one Kansas City player in all my lineups. And with Sammy Watkins getting hurt, with Kelsey being the only guy that really went off in that offense, I was feeling good about that in the second quarter. But that second half for the Chiefs was pretty rough. So nothing for me. Glad you were able to run something up there. 99% CMC. Mike Davis, you guys have been all over that, and glad to see it's paying off once again for you.
Thank you. And one question I got a lot was about triple stacking this lineup, and a concept you and I have talked about is not overthinking that tight end spot when you can correlate it. You know, I had room for a cheap tight end with Akins getting ruled out, played Darren Fells, and is it a little risky to go with a triple stack? But yes, but it's not a huge field size, so you don't need a big ceiling performance out of everyone. AKA, you can see Will Fuller didn't have a ceiling performance by any means, and Cooks and Fells were so cheap. It's not like you needed a ton. Someone says, wait, can you link the Showdown breakdown article you were just on? I will link it really quickly. I'll leave this up. This is from Cody Main. He does our Showdown article. These are our projections. We have ownership projections here. And he goes through all the guys he really likes as far as leverage. He categorizes them as leverage plays, value plays, good plays, dart throws. It's a really good article. So make sure you check that out. You also get some distributions on guys' ceilings and how they've scored their fantasy points. So we'll go down to the projections though to get started. And on tonight's show, we're going to go through we'll start by going through the overall breakdown of this slate. There's some injury situations you want to cover, but before we do that, I do want to remind people, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow, helps us do these free Monday night shows. Like the video, that goes a long way towards helping us and to continue to do these free shows each Monday, which we're trying to do them as often as we can on Mondays for Showdown. I think next week we'll probably get a 2-game slate with the Bills game getting moved to Monday night. So getting into the overall breakdown of this slate, Drew, some injury situations. I guess Michael Thomas has turned into an injury situation, but he is inactive. On the Chargers side of things, Austin Eckler is out after getting injured last week, but Mike Williams does return.
Yeah, and that makes it sort of an interesting slate in a different way. If we had both of those guys, it would be an interesting slate in terms of there'd be so many kind of upper end expensive guys that command a lot of volume. And because you take those big volume holes out, you get opportunities for some potential cheap guys that might pop up that are going to be on the field a little bit more, that might run into kind of a random big play that separates the slate. And so I think it's very different slate between the two potential situations, with either having Eckler and Thomas in or Eckler and Thomas out. And obviously Eckler's out for a while. Josh Kelly and Justin Jackson are going to split that workload is our expectation. in the replacement for Eckler, but they don't have the same type of DFS ceiling as Eckler, because neither of those guys are the pass catchers that Eckler is, which opens up a lot of targets to potentially be spread around, especially when you've already had Keenan Allen commanding, like a 38% target share so far early in the season, especially with his time with Justin Herbert. So it's a really interesting slate. These are teams. New Orleans is a team that has been on so many different showdown slates over the years, and they do some unusual stuff. We've seen Taysom Hill get some goal line opportunities. We've seen sort of random big plays from guys. And so you can see some interesting distributions on results with the Saints. In the Chargers, we haven't gone on quite as many showdown slates, but in recent years, their offense has been more concentrated with Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, or Melvin Gordon. And now, we'll get Mike Williams back tonight, but we'll still probably see some additional snaps from these secondary receiving options for the Chargers, which just opens up some interesting concepts in Showdown.
Yes, and Drew, I do got to point out that people in chat want you to know, they don't want you to feel bad about Cam Akers. Process was there. If he falls in the end zone, it's a smash from Michael saying, and he was under 1% in most people's contests. But yeah.
Nailed the ownership, and then had the quote after the game that Sean McVay said his workload will increase next week. So I've been self-deprecating on Twitter about that and about the flag plants not going well. But I felt like I made good recommendations yesterday. So I appreciate the support. I'm doing well. I'm doing just fine. But thank you all.
So this Kelly Eckler situation, or not Kelly Eckler, I'm sorry, this Kelly Justin Jackson situation is really critical to the slate with Eckler being out. As you mentioned, neither of these guys have the ceiling Eckler does, whose combination of efficiency and usage in the passing game is out of this world. They have used Josh Kelly more in the passing game than I think we all expected coming into the year. Pat Crane, I think he estimated he played 65% of the snaps last night. This week, if we go to the week 4 volume breakdown, if you want to look at the snap share, Josh Kelly played 57% of the snaps. Justin Jackson played 39%. That was with Eckler getting hurt pretty early in that game. We have it pretty similar. I think it's closer to a 1A, 1B situation than the field might, which has me on Justin Jackson a little bit. But the good news for Kelly is he already had that goal line role. So probably certainly some more touchdown equity for Kelly. He's at 8,200 though. Jackson's at 4,400. That makes Jackson a pretty intriguing play. We have him and Latavius Murray projected about the same. I think Murray, benefits from the higher team total. So the touchdown equity on Murray is higher than Jackson, but Jackson has the potential to grab, I think, more overall touches than Latavius Murray. And this New Orleans side with Michael Thomas out, Jared Cook coming back, but Deontay Harris is out. It's tough. I thought Emmanuel Sanders was kind of dead in the water because he wasn't picking up targets with Michael Thomas out. And then if I go back to this weekly volume, we go to New Orleans.
14 last week, I think was the number, something like that.
Manny gets 9 targets, 36% target share. There weren't a whole ton of targets to be had. 24, targets from last week. So I've got him and Traquan pretty similar. I think Traquan's got your bigger playability, but Manny, with a touch more volume, is what we are projecting tonight. And that also leaves room, though, with Deontay Harris out, whose role had been growing. If we go back, you have Benny Fowler and Marquez Callaway as like your cheap, potential players that'll probably be somewhat important in this slate where, there's some chalky, expensive players. Kamara's ownership, especially in captain, is going to be massive.
Yeah, and the reason these guys are going to be relevant is because whenever the Saints go into 3 wide receiver sets or 4 wide receiver sets, and 3 wide receiver sets are very, very common in the NFL, you just look at kind of what they're left with without Michael Thomas, and you've got Sanders, Traquan Smith, and then you've got either Callaway or Benny Fowler here now, and no Harris. Harris was a guy they were doing like gadget plays for and used him in special teams in the return game as well. So I think Callaway has the edge on those types of touches in terms of how they'd use him as opposed to Fowler. I think Fowler is kind of more of a traditional receiver. And so I'm pretty interested in those guys, especially at low projected ownership and ways to, maybe leave a little bit of salary on the table and be a little bit unique with some of those Kamara captain type teams that we're sure are likely going to be very popular.
Yeah, I'm really torn on if people are going to play these guys. I don't think people will play Fowler. I think Callaway, he got a touch last week. I think they'll play him some. We have him at 8% ownership. It wouldn't shock me if he came in at 10 to 15. And then Fowler, I don't think people will play him, but he's also kind of like the only $200 player that you could play. I mean, there's, I guess, Gabe Neighbors, the fullback for the Chargers. We don't have him for any work. I think he did get a touch last week. Garrett Griffin's like a special teamer. Adam Troutman's inactive. Griffin's like a special teamer who blocked and played a decent amount of snaps last week, but I have no interest in him. And then KJ Hill, like, very easily could not play. So Fowler's the one guy at 200. That's probably going to play a little bit. But zooming, and as far as inactives go, the big ones were Troutman and Jason Moore, and then Mike Williams is active. And someone asks me, what percentage do you plan on playing Mike Williams? I think Mike Williams could end up at, like, sneakily a really good play. The price tag's low. He's a big play guy. Coming off injury, I think people will be hesitant to play him. Our projected ownership's 22%. I envision myself being overweight on Mike Williams. How about you, Drew?
I think that number is low enough that if we're right on it in the mid 20s, I'll probably end up being overweight. People are mentioning Lattimore being active, and obviously that's a concern for Mike Williams because we know Lattimore doesn't really travel into the slot, and Keenan Allen plays out of the slot so much. But I think just in terms of, if you look kind of below that range, there's not so many guys. There's not too many guys that can really kind of get there in one big play, right? Like Latavius Murray, Justin Jackson, those guys are going to require a decent amount of volume to really get there. And Williams can really hit on kind of one big play down the field, and that's kind of how they use him. So I will probably be overweight the field. I imagine there's more paths to getting unique through him. And I like those 5K receiving options. I love Emmanuel Sanders tonight as well. I think he's one of the better plays on the slate. He's one of the ones that, to me, like, stood out a little bit from a pricing standpoint, just because you've got Traquan Smith projecting very similarly for $1,400 more. And, we've got the ownership similar between those two. I think if the ownership is similar between those two, I'd much rather Manny Sanders. I think the early season target share is a little bit to do with, the situation of guys getting comfortable with new teammates, right? And a lack of kind of off-season prep and different things like that. And I think last week is kind of more of what we might expect to see. So I'm pretty interested in Manny Sanders tonight as one of my favorite plays. But I like Mike Williams, and I'll probably overweight the field him too.
Someone asks, does anyone remember Leone drunk on Overset show last year?
Does Leone remember it?
I was going to say, I think one of us between you and me remembers that probably a little more.
A lot differently.
Than the other. So while we're talking about these receiver situations, though, Jalen Guyton, ? So Guyton had a good game last week. I believe he had a long touchdown and he played a decent bit, but Mike Williams was out, and he played 85% of the snaps. He still only saw one target. He had that 1 for 72 and a touchdown. So it's hard for me to give Guyton too much love when you play 85% of the snaps and you see one target, and now your snaps are likely going to get reduced, like, somewhat significantly. This is a really congested offense for the Chargers. So, I'm not removing Guyton from my pool, but if I was doing like single entry or 3 max, anything like that, he's not in play for me at all. And, Drew, we did have a structure to this show outline that Tyler KB, our co-founder / boss, sent us. And the questions coming in are pretty good. So I'm kind of ad-libbing this a little bit.
I was trying to move us through, like, subtly with the pricing that stuck out to me. But I did want to say the Chargers last week, 3 players that caught a touchdown on their one target, right?
Yes,
that's a pretty amazing box score. I don't think that
Tyron Johnson and Parham. Parham, shout out Adam Levitan, loves Parham, XFL star. 1 snap. He took it.
That's one
touchdown.
That's a model of efficiency. The guy's never been on the field and not scored. How can you not play him?
Is anyone playing Parham? We got that question. If I was doing a 150 set, I might play like 2 Parham lineups. I mean, he's literally played 1 snap all season. But there is something to, maybe he does play a little bit more. Yeah, but don't play much Parham. If you're hand building a lineup, don't play Parham. I'll get fired for telling you guys to play Parham. Okay, so one situation I did want to talk about a lot is the captain ownership and Drew Brees and Justin Herbert and captain. So quarterback captains are difficult to figure out. So and I think both these scenarios resemble 2 difficulties in different ways. With Drew Brees, the difficulty with him, especially with Michael Thomas out, is, obviously he doesn't run. And generally, if you don't run at all, being a captain quarterback's not that great because there's usually one pass catcher that's going to outscore you on your team. Yeah. But with Brees, we have seen him just spread it out so much. And then with Herbert, he's congested, so you wouldn't think he'd be captain, but he does have some rushing ability. In general, I think, being underweight the QB captains makes some sense. It's a little weird because we have Kamara with so much captain ownership that like Drew Brees being captain might end up even being a little bit contrarian. With our projections right now, have Brees and Herbert with around 10% captain ownership, which is behind their skill player teammates and Alvin Kamara and Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is Herbert's got that rushing capability, but what we've seen so far from Herbert is just this willingness to really lock in on Keenan Allen. And that makes it so that Keenan Allen has a little bit of a higher ceiling because receivers always have higher ceilings than quarterbacks, even though quarterbacks have often better mean or median projections. And when people use projections to make lineups, a lot of times that leads to the quarterbacks kind of getting inflated captain ownership. But certainly because Herbert has that rushing capability, there's some paths for it to work out there. I'll probably end up being maybe a little bit over on Brees and probably under on Herbert is my guess. Just kind of rolling through things. And then how are you dealing with Kamara and Allen? Because, if those 2 guys are going to combine for, 40% of the captain ownership, but also project as the guys with the nuclear ceilings kind of on this slate, the 35 type fantasy point performances, how do you handle them?
Yeah, I think if you were playing the non-MME lotto, I actually think it's pretty interesting that you could make some really good non-Kamara captain teams. And I think that's an interesting way, like just make a really good team without Kamara at captain. And we talk about this on the Established Million show. These smaller fields ownership gets conflated. So 25% captain ownership, that's for the $10 contests that most people are playing with 500K to first. But if you're playing in one of the other contests, Kamara could push 50% captain ownership. And I think that's too much. I think at that point, I could make a Keenan Allen team. You could justify actually a Kamara fade if you were making just like one team and you really wanted to be different, just because he is really expensive. If you wanted to get in Brees, Herbert, and Keenan Allen, it's not nuts that Kamara's not in that lineup. Now, MME, when the ownership starts to get spread out, I'm going to have a lot of Kamara. He's going to be in the lineups that are most likely to occur. I'm not going to full galaxy brain myself out of playing Kamara. I might even be overweight his captain and just trying to be unique around him somewhat in MME. So it's like very different game structures. And someone did ask regarding Kamara, do you think that playing Kamara and Murray in the same lineup insane? In a boss co-founder type relationship? Not insane at all, because one thing, my rant, I do this rant a lot on Showdown slates, but people take their main slate strategies and apply it to Showdown in terms of they think about what does a guy need to happen for their 99th percentile ceiling to occur. For Latavius Murray's ceiling to occur, he probably needs Kamara to not have a good game, take Kamara's touchdowns, have Kamara even get hurt. But guess what? It's one game. These guys could each hit their 50th percentile outcomes and be in the optimal lineup. And if the offense is rolling for the Saints, they're both probably going to do well. So they actually might even be like somewhat positively correlated, even if they're not correlated at the tippy top of their potential outcomes. So I would not be afraid at all to do Kamara, Latavius lineups. And also, when you get a guy with such an outlier projection like Kamara, it changes things too, where like he could easily be the top scorer on the slate without a huge game, and some other guys that can get there that might be negatively correlated.
Yeah, like the last time we saw the Saints play, right, against Detroit, like that's a game situation where both Kamara and Latavius Murray probably ended up in, I don't know if there was a showdown slate for that game, but they both probably would have ended up in the optimal lineup just because they're both scoring 20 fantasy points, and not a lot of guys in general go ahead and score 20 fantasy points.
Okay, let's see. Taysom Hill, man, that is the thing. These Saints slates can be really just mess with your mind a bit. And Taysom Hill is a big reason why. One, like figuring out the correlation on Taysom Hill is very difficult. And he's hard to project because he doesn't see a lot of volume, but on any given game that could change. But more importantly, when he does see volume, and you've pointed this out to me a lot, Drew, it's in some pretty high leverage situations. Like it's potential big plays that you could get there with 3, touches. Yeah,
it's a weird situation because you mentioned highly leveraged, and I don't know if you were referring to kind of the volatility of the points or the legitimate leverage on his teammates.
Like when I said leverage, I was thinking more the spot, like he's playing spots where it's like a trick play, he's throwing a deep touchdown. Or
it's a volatility of point production where if the play hits, he immediately gets like 7 to 10 points and is immediately, because he's so cheap, a likely candidate for the optimal lineup. But there's also the fact that if those plays hit for him, they're often in scoring position, and they're often taking the ball out of the hands of Breeze, Kamara, Latavius Murray, when Michael Thomas is healthy, any of the receivers. So it's just a weird situation where he's a play that can really change the landscape of the slate very quickly. And because the Saints have been on so many primetime games and so many showdown slates, and he's had some of these weird games on showdown slates, he's become, I don't know if there's any player in the NFL that is more associated with showdown in the DFS community than Taysom Hill. I feel like it's weird that a player that, I don't know, he might have less than 15 touches in the history of showdown slates, and he might be the most known player in the NFL for showdown DFS.
Yeah, it's wild. And you can see here we have 12% projected ownership. I imagine you mock me. I like to cop out and just say I'm going to play the field. So that's probably.
I think it's a tough slate because he's now there have been some slates where he's priced up a little bit closer to like the kickers and stuff. And that's when I think he's like pretty clearly a bad play because you're now needing that play to hit for him to kind of match that level of production. He's in this weird kind of in-between phase now pricing where he's not quite the full punt cheap guy that allows you to get everybody in, but he's also, far enough away from the kickers and defenses that he probably has the best upside of any of the guys priced around him. So I think he's a reasonable play tonight. There's been other slates where I have not thought he's a very good play at all. My concern is just always that he becomes so associated with showdown that he gets over-owned. At 12, I don't think it's terrible, but if he's 22 or something like that, then I would really want to be on the underside of that.
Yeah, and the other thing with this slate, there's not a whole lot in the way of cheap guys,
right?
With a lot of expensive players, which. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if his ownership did get pushed up maybe a little bit closer to 20%. I wonder if maybe that comes at the expense of some of the kickers. I think the kickers are, people always ask about kickers, but I think they're fine plays tonight. Generally, 2 kicker lineups aren't great, so I would keep that in mind. Generally, kickers against opposing defenses aren't great, so keep that in mind. But a dome game with a pretty high total, the kickers can certainly get there. And again, the skill players cheaper than them, there's not a ton. So the kickers might actually end up as really good leverage plays off of Murray and Jackson. Right now, we have all 4 of those guys owned about the same. I have noticed the underdog kickers seem to go pretty low owned. So Badgley might be a pretty interesting kicker. We're still getting a lot of Kamara questions. could you fade him in single entry? I went over that. I think you could. In cash, if you're sicko and you play cash, would you play Kamara? Here's
glad we found Andrew Wiggins.
Showdown is crazy, but I'm doing it. We won't judge you, well, a little bit, but Kamara and captain restricts you to only one QB, and this is the exact reason why you can fade him in single entry is to play the double QB. But I think you want Kamara captain in cash.
I would play Kamara captain in cash. Shout out to Andrew Wiggins, Burner, Mosey B, Dowie 24. We see you, Andrew, playing that showdown cash. I would play him in the captain spot in cash. I think he's just got a floor ceiling combination that's pretty unique. Thoughts on building with Thoughts on building with a lineup that had either?
Oh, I do want to answer this question real quick, and then I'll go back to the Kamara question. Tyron Johnson, KJ Hill not showing up in F-Labs ETR projections. Guys with under 2 points, sometimes there's a filter you have to click on Labs to display all guys. They filter out sometimes the guys with a really low projection. So we have uploaded the projections. They should be there. I will double check after the stream, but you might just have to uncheck that filter that's preventing them from being displayed on your Labs output. But yeah, going back to that question was lineup must include either Kamara captain or Kamara flex.
So lock Kamara. Do you lock Kamara on this?
Yeah, that was an interesting way of asking if you lock Kamara.
Yeah. That's a very technical way of asking, do you lock Kamara? That's clearly showing what side of the hand build versus optimizers team you are on, XJ Price, with the optimizer representing question. And this is one of those things, like, if that's the way you feel, that's totally a justifiable way to approach the slate. I think I try not to force things like that, especially like the challenge with Kamara is you're like immediately overset with the opto talk, disgusting. You're immediately walking into a lot of dupes, which is just the challenge. But if you were locking Kamara, Mike, what percentage of lineups would you want him in the captain spot? I would think you'd want a heavy amount, right? Because you're already betting.
Yeah, I think at that point you'd want to get off the 2 QB teams with Kamara and flex, right? Like those are probably pretty popular. If already going to be super popular, playing a ton of Kamara, I'd want him heavy cap. Like I said in MME, I still might be overweight Kamara. I'm not going to lock him because I think there are some legitimately good lineups you can make fading Kamara on this slate. Where he gets 20 points and he's not in the optimal lineup because of pricing. Again, we've talked about like the cheap guys. There's not a ton of them, which might drive Taysom up. It might drive Callaway up a little bit more. I do wonder if those guys start to get a little bit more owned. And Jared Cook, who someone noted says Jared Cook's going to shake up the target tree tonight. I do wonder if maybe we're over projecting his ownership a hair coming back from injury. So he's kind of interesting where, I think a lot of people might go up to Traquan or down to Manny Sanders.
Possible.
I usually see Manny after last week maybe being closer to 40 and Cook.
I think Traquan's the guy that's a little bit more vulnerable there on the ownership side.
People are gonna smash that 2 TD game, dude. Love playing Traquan.
Fair. I'm going to answer my own question on the Kamara thing. I think I'd want 55 to 60% captain if I was locking Kamara.
Okay. So based on historical showdown results, stats of the cap, is this a game you paid QB DSTT K at captain and simply focus on RB? So I like the historical showdown results. It helps a lot, but like each slate is obviously unique. I wouldn't full fade tight end at captain. I don't think I don't know. That's an interesting question. Like, would you only play running backs and receivers and captain?
The first thing when you have these types of questions that I would ask is, when we say full fade, how many lineups are you playing, right? Like, if you're playing like 3, maybe you go that route. If you're playing like 20, maybe. Playing 150, probably not, right? Like, so it really depends on the number of lineups that you're playing and how aggressive you want to get on your strategies. I'm a person who plays 150, so I don't think through things from like a macro stance on taking big fade positions. My underweights will naturally probably come at a lot of those positions. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the DST. This feels like a slate where I'm not going to play a lot of DST, especially at those ownerships. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not going to play a lot of DST. I think playing tight end at captain makes some sense, just because I think Hunter Henry with his ADOT does have some upside. It might not be very owned at captain. As I just mentioned with Jared Cook coming off injury, he might not be his own at captain. So I do have some interest there. QB I could see fading for the reason we talked about at the top of the show, where Drew Brees doesn't run at all and the Chargers are congested. So there's just a really high probability that one of their skill player teammates is going to beat them. And actually on that point, one galaxy brain move I think would be a Keenan Allen captain without Herbert. That's a way that you can get highly owned players into your lineup and still be a little different from the field. Because a lot of times you look at cumulative ownership, but correlation matters too, where people are saying, oh, Keenan Allen captain, I'm going to make a rule where I have to play his quarterback. And because Keenan Allen can get there on catches and yards and not a ton of touchdowns, and he has just such an absurd, he's got a potential for 45% target share on a given night, that easily Breeze could outscore Herbert, even with Keenan Allen at captain. And then if Kamara has a good but not amazing game, you'll want him and you won't be able to afford a second quarterback. I think that's okay. A little bit of an advanced strategy. It's not something I would do a ton of, but I think it makes sense.
Trying to think through that, because that's the 1-5 captain type builds, right? Like a Keenan.
Yeah, I don't know if I would 1-5 it. That's extreme. We did see one of those hit the other night. I was dangerously close to hitting on Allen Robinson captain with Brady over Foles Thursday night.
Yeah.
I was an Allen Robinson drop at the end of the game away from winning with that construction. So I'm thinking more of that than I am 1-5. Okay. But if there was a 1-5 situation like this, it's kind of it, right?
It's those kind of guys, right? It's the Keenan Allen, it's the Michael Thomas, it's the guys, the Nuke Hopkins, it's the guys who can get 14 catches for 150 yards and their team struggles to score in the end zone, and then it kind of limits some of the other players on their team from getting into the lineup.
Avery G asks if he's only making one lineup, should he just be doing single entry contests? I think so. There's a lot of people playing 150 lineups in the $10 MME, and it's really difficult to feel like you have any control, I feel like, over your lineup if you're single entering that, where if you want to play some good plays, you're probably going to run into a very duped team, which is minus EV, but you also don't want to play this crazy contrarian lineup when you're only doing one entry. So I really think for Showdown, I wouldn't say this is true for main slates, but for Showdown, Drew, I would be doing single entry contests if I was only making one entry on the night.
I would agree. And there's some contests where you can find big enough, first place prize pools to kind of whet your appetite. And the way that you kind of think about this is most lineups that you're going to create where you have just one anyway are going to be duped so heavily that, that contest says 500K to first, but what you're playing for first with a single lineup that's likely to be heavily duped is probably going to be closer to maybe some of these other contests in terms of what the first place prize is. And obviously the single entry you're looking at, there's a $5 entry versus a $10 entry to the main MME. So
yeah, there's a $5 single entry. It's actually still, 1,500 to first, which is, what's that, 100X. So that's pretty good. There's a lot of single entries. A $15 single entry, that's 5K to first. I would definitely stick in those type of contests. Hey, Michael, rewind a little bit if you didn't hear us talk about Keenan Allen 5 cents at flex, because we just did that one. Okay, before we wrap up, I guess anything else you want to hit on? I know you do MME, you're very good with the rules and the boost or the correlations that you can do on Fantasy Labs Optimizer. Any rules for the people that you would or wouldn't make tonight?
So some rules that I would for sure make are any quarterback captain lineup needs 2 pass catchers. They can be a running back because it can be Kamara as the pass catcher with Breeze, but they need at least 2. And I would not use exactly. I would use at least because you can still get 3 or 4 kind of in showdown lineups. I would probably limit kickers and defenses. Like what I do is I kind of limit them to 2 spots. Like I don't want more than 2 spots between the 4 kickers and defenses. It's usually not a problem I run into too much because I don't play the kickers that heavily. And then certain wide receivers I would want paired with the quarterback.
Land is not having your opto. It's not an overset burner.
Now we've got the hand builders, we've got the optimizers, and we've got the brain builders. We have a third-party candidate coming into the race late here, the Kanye West of the build arguments. But I would captain, for instance, Mike Williams with a quarterback, I think, because I think if he's getting there, it's via touchdowns and via big plays, but I might not Keenan Allen. I would captain Traquan Smith, probably with Drew Brees. Yeah. So I think Keenan Allen's the one guy that I might not. Maybe Hunter Henry, but Hunter Henry I would probably correlate with Herbert.
Yeah, and as far as the min 2 pass catchers, I'm tempted to say you could do min 1 on Chargers because they're concentrated, but like you could get the Herbert rushing touchdown. But there's a good chance that if it's 1 pass catcher, that one pass catcher is the captain.
Right.
Which
that's why you use min 2 usually.
No Troutman. Does that heavily affect anyone on the Saints? Not really, because Jared Cook's back. Troutman was barely playing before that. Garrett Griffin's active as a third tight end. He played last week. He's mostly a blocker, special teamer. We have him for 0.3 points. Probably a guy I would personally cut out. Getting some more Jackson Kelly. We covered, would you use Kamara and Latavius in the same lineup? It was yes. Would you use Jackson Kelly in the same lineup? I think my answer is the same. I think it's something you can do tonight. I think people sometimes over restrict themselves in Showdown. And when it's a split situation, a team that's going to run a decent bit, a lot of points, more importantly, the price. I mean, Kelly's price did get pushed up close to Eckler. So I don't want to say the price is great, but Jackson at 4,400 is a really great price. So I think it's fine. Maybe I wouldn't captain Kelly and play Jackson in the same lineup.
I would. Yeah, so I'd be okay. I think captain would even be okay, but I would max 2 of Jackson, Kelly, Herbert.
So you wouldn't play Herbert if you're playing 2 of the running backs. That's like a really good. I like hearing Drew's thoughts on rules because I think sometimes we need to think like even bigger. Like we think about like these simplified rules. Oh, would you play these 2 running backs? And Drew, you're taking it kind of this next step. It's I can play 2 running backs, but that's probably a more run heavy game. They'll catch a lot of checkdowns. We're not getting a whole ton of Justin Herbert rushing and throwing to Keenan Allen as much. So I think I like thinking through that sort of like the next level on the rules. Okay. I think that's going to do it for us. I do want to encourage people to check out Cody Main's article on Establish the Run. If you are a subscriber, you should be subscribing to ETR. We got all sorts of great content. Drew and I are live every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time, but you can also watch it or listen to it after the fact with our Establish the Million GPP show. It's kind of similar to this in some ways, a little bit more structured. We don't have all the questions, but it's focused on the main slate GPPs. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel and like the video. It really helps us continue to do these free videos on Monday night. So that's a big help. So just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Best of luck in your Showdown contest tonight.